the most powerful designer drugs are the digital ones we use daily. And we get high off them. One touch, tap, like, scroll at a time. Just like tech creators want us to. Use digital without digital using you. Learn more at sync.ithra.com.
Hello and welcome to episode number 241 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to say thanks to some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Lisa, Mason Shinkwin, Liam, Jamie D, Laurie, Tiny B, Ray Ray, Madeline Rohrer, Sarah LL, Jane, Deb Shure, Christine Horwitz, Linda Woods, JQ, Tristan Mitchell, Melissa Glidewell, Fruity Chick, Suri K, Moore Spiller, and Sam Glaister. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you and I appreciate you every single day. And our film review this week, our film review is Longlegs. Longlegs was released in 2024. It has 7.2 out of 10 on IMDb and 86% on Rotten Tomatoes. FBI agent Lee Harker is a gifted new recruit, assigned to the unsolved case of an elusive serial killer. As the case takes complex turns, unearthing evidence of the occult, Harker discovers a personal connection to the merciless killer and must race against time to stop him before he claims the lives of another innocent family. So I've seen a lot of talk about this film, and I apologise in advance if this turns into a rant, because I already know that it's going to. But let's do the likes and dislikes, okay? Look, it was a very different horror film, and I always respect a horror film that tries to do something different and strays away from the norm. Like, this is not a film where there is jump scares and what I kind of often refer to as like the Hollywoodization of horror film, where you get loud music for no reason that gives jump scares, and it's not that kind of a film. So props to them for that. And it was very stylish. It was very beautiful to look at. It looked really good and it used some really clever shots. So when you first meet Nicolas Cage's character, for example, you sort of see him from a child's perspective. So you kind of see him from the waist and then it like travels upwards until you see his face. And I appreciate that thought and effort went into these shots and went into how this film looked. And it did look very beautiful. And I think the story itself was very clever. Like, the synopsis doesn't do it justice. So there's these vicious murders in different households where the father of the household appears to be manipulated into murdering his family and killing himself. And they can't figure out how it's happening, but there's like a cipher left at every crime scene. So somebody else is definitely involved, but they can't figure out how they're getting into the house. There's kind of no sign of forced entry. They don't know how this is happening. They don't know how these fathers are being forced into doing these killings, but it's happening and they need to figure that out. In a way, it kind of felt like an extended episode of Criminal Minds. And I love Criminal Minds. So for me, that was no bad thing. And the protagonist in this story, Lee Harker, she has these psychic abilities. That's not a spoiler. You find out within the first, 10 minutes of the film that she has these psychic abilities. And the FBI recognized these psychic abilities, which is why they put her on this case. It did make me wonder, has that ever happened quietly in real life, I mean, the police and the FBI and all those people, they always deny using external psychics in cases, but there are always external psychics who are like, oh yeah, I consulted with the FBI and the police on this case, But I wonder if there are ever FBI agents that have particular abilities or seem to have abilities, and the FBI, do they go, oh, let's try and dive into this and see if we can use this in some way, which I'm pretty sure is like the basis of the Montauk Project conspiracy. Anyway, we're not getting into that, but she is a character who I just didn't particularly like, and I think that's not a bad thing. I think sometimes films fall into the trap of having people who are just good, who make good decisions, and bad things happen to them, in particular in horror films. And actually, I found this character quite difficult to like. She made stupid decisions, I felt, and she annoyed me in general. And do you know what? And I kind of appreciate that, because people are nuanced. It's not black and white. People have difficult pasts, and it makes them make difficult decisions and seem to make bad decisions. So I thought, good on them for not making this character just a perfect FBI agent woman who was just trying to do the right thing, Which leads me to my dislikes. I honestly hated Nicolas Cage's performance in this. I know that is an unpopular opinion about this film, but I hated his performance. Everything I'd seen about this film before I went into the cinema. Now, in fairness, I tried to kind of limit what I saw about it, so I didn't know that much about it, but everyone was like, oh my God, this film is terrifying, and Nicolas Cage is so terrifying in this film, you will have nightmares about his performance. Everyone was like, he is unrecognisable, it's amazing. Yeah, of course he's unrecognisable. He literally has prosthetics up to his eyeballs. Of course he's physically unrecognisable. They've added another face to his face to make him a different person. And I just don't think that makes it a good performance. Because the performance, it was recognisable as Nicolas Cage when he performed. Okay? Ooh, it really annoyed me. So he's this sort of eccentric character. He's heavily prosthetic, and I watched a video afterwards that was like, it's meant to be cosmetic procedures that are gone wrong. Fine, there sort of isn't any reference to that in the film, but yeah, he has loads and loads of prosthetics on, but his performance is so jarring. So there's points where he instead of talking, like, bursts into song and sings at people. And I just thought those moments took me right out of the film. And I was like, this isn't creepy. This isn't scary. And somebody needed to rein him in and say, Nicholas, I know that you're trying to be like strange and weird and eccentric as this character, but what you're doing is not working. Like, when I see a strange, eccentric and unsettling character in a horror film, I want them to like take my breath away. Do you know what I mean? I want them to be like terrifying that it makes me stop, and you have that feeling of all the air being sucked out of the room. In this instance, it took my breath away because I couldn't stop laughing at his performance. It was comical for all the wrong reasons. And like I said with my likes, the story was really good, the basis of the story, but it went off the rails at the end. And I think a part of it was because the director wanted to have a slow burn of a film, a slow psychological burn. And I can get on board with that. I like a horror film that is slow and delicious and unsettling and unnerving. But what happened here, it felt like 3/4 of the story was shoved into the last 20 minutes. And as a result, there were kind of no good explanations for anything. And I feel like there were supernatural elements that were introduced literally in the last 20 minutes, where I was like, where the fuck did this come from? And as a result, it just felt messy. And I thought, oh, well, I'm annoyed now because we've had this gorgeous slow burn, and now all these crazy things have happened in the last 20 minutes that you're desperately trying to explain, but not really explaining adequately enough. I do feel, however, that this had the basis to be a really good TV series, maybe. But did I think this is like the scariest film of the year and it will leave you with nightmares, blah, 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 blah? No, I did not. I thought it was particularly overhyped and not very well executed. Is it entertaining? Yes. Is it worth a watch? Yeah, I think so. But I'm going to give it 3 stars. But I do have something that I would like to add to that. After I'd seen the movie, I was watching some videos about it on TikTok, and a lot of the comments were like, If you didn't like this movie, then you clearly don't understand film. If you didn't like this movie, then you're clearly somebody who enjoys, jump scares and you think that's good horror. I'm convinced that people who didn't like this movie have no media literacy. And obviously, because I didn't particularly enjoy the film in the way that everybody else seemed to, there must have been a part of that felt that made me feel quite sensitive and quite attacked. I was like, excuse me, I do have media literacy, I'll have you know. But here's what I have to say, right? Let people like what they like. And let people dislike what they dislike. It's fine. Cinema is meant to be subjective. And if somebody loves a horror movie with loads of jump scares and, loads of gore, or if somebody loves a psychological horror film or like a really cerebral horror film, fine. Let people like what they like. And if somebody doesn't like a film, it doesn't necessarily mean they didn't get it or they didn't understand it. It's okay to have differing opinions, It's what makes the world juicy and interesting. And also, I just have to say it, okay? The film's called Longlegs. His legs were not that long. So that felt deceptive.
To get people excited about Boost Mobile's new nationwide 5G network, we're offering unlimited talk, text, and data for $25 a month.
Forever.
Even if you have a baby.
Even if your baby has a baby.
Even if you grow old and wrinkly and you start repeating yourself.
Even if you start repeating yourself.
Even if you're on your deathbed and you need to make one last call.
Or text.
Right, or text the long-lost son you abandoned at birth.
You'll still get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile.
Forever!
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Forever!
Did I hear you're shopping for a car? Because I've been at it for ages. Ugh, such a time suck, right?
Not really. I bought it on Carvana. Super convenient.
Oh, then comes all the financing, research. Am I right?
Well, you can, but I got pre-qualified for a Carvana auto loan in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, but then all the number crunching and terms, right?
Nope. I saw real numbers as I shopped, found my dream car, and got it in a couple of days.
Wait, like you already have it?
Yep.
Oh.
Go to Carvana.com to finance your car the convenient way.
Which brings us to our story this week. Now, before we deep dive into this story, I have to say, and this is a very serious preamble into this story, under no circumstances should you go to the bridge where this story takes place. It is incredibly dangerous, and numerous people over the years have lost their lives on this bridge because it is a railway bridge. It is still in use, and they say that when you are on the bridge, if you hear the train coming, it is too late to get off the bridge. There is no safety kind of walkways either side of the bridge. It's just railway bridge. It is still in use, and people who have gone in search of this creature, of this monster, to this bridge, a lot of people have lost their lives, and I mean that very seriously. So this is a story to listen to and enjoy, but there's no need to go and find this creature. There's no need to prove yourself. I want everyone to be safe and happy, so please don't do that. And with that, let's get into the story. In cryptozoology, there are creatures that definitely seem possible. Take Bigfoot, for example. It's not beyond the realms of possibility for a humanoid type creature or a genus of ape to be living outside of scientific classification. Or maybe the Loch Ness Monster. Maybe some sort of dinosaur really did survive extinction deep in the bowels of the lake. Or maybe it's just a giant eel. Either way, it doesn't stretch too far outside the reach of our beliefs. But there are some stories that make us roll our eyes. They seem so absurd, such impossible cryptids that the stories are laughable. Stories of goatmen seem silly. And sometimes I feel that even if I came face to face with a goatman, I would just laugh. And then probably run very fast. Okay, that's also not true. I would jog very slowly away, but I digress. Goatmen stories seem ridiculous at the surface of it, but I do think it's interesting that stories of goatmen have existed since the dawn of time. This is not a new phenomenon like the stories of Slender Man that were born in creepypasta threads and wormed their way into the mainstream. No, these stories are as old as time, and the deeper we dig, the stranger and more frightening they become. In Greek mythology, the satyr is a male nature spirit. And bear with me because this is about to get weird. The satyr had ears and tail of a horse, and most importantly, had a permanent and exaggerated erection. He was generally depicted as having horse legs, and they were bawdy and unruly and loved wine and music and dancing and women. They were often depicted masturbating and would attempt to rape both woodland nymphs and mortal women alike. People began to conflate that story of the satyr with the story of Pan, the god of the wild. Pan has the legs, hindquarters, and horns of a goat. Pan is the god of fields and glens and wooded groves and is connected to fertility and spring. There's also the legend of the faun, and there is the Irish legend of the Bochanach, half-human, half-goat demons that flew above the battlefield wailing and screeching. There is the Slavic Leshy, god of the forest, who is said to have goat horns, ears, feet, and long claw-like fingernails. So it could be said that Goatman lore is pretty universal. Our story today takes us to Louisville, Kentucky in the 1800s, and the circus was rolling into town. Now, this was not like the circus that we know today. This was a circus that contained a very special sideshow. Circus freaks. Many moons ago, there was little concern or regard for those who were considered different. They were often objects of shame and ridicule, and in some cases, they were objects to be profited from. From the 1840s to the 1940s, freak shows were really popular, and they were a lucrative business too. People like P.T. Barnum went on the hunt for people who lived on the fringes of society, people who were different, people who the public would pay good money to come and see. Despite what The Greatest Showman might try to portray, Barnum was not the saviour of the freaks. He was a man who wanted to make as much money as possible and didn't care who he exploited to do so. But again, I digress. Some of the most famous freaks included Grady Stiles, the lobster boy, who was born with a genetic deformity in his hands and feet. There was General Tom Thumb, who, according to his mother, stopped growing at 6 months old and eventually began growing again, albeit incredibly slowly. At the end of his life, he was approximately 3 feet tall. There was Lionel, the lion-faced man, whose real name was Stephen Bibrowski. He was born in Poland in the late 1800s with a condition called hypertrichosis, which causes excessive hair to grow all over your body. His mother believed that this was because she had seen his father being mauled by a lion when she was pregnant. Believing he was an abomination, his mother gave him away to the circus when he was 4 years old. On this circus train that was rolling into Louisville, there was a very special freak. It was sure to draw the crowds. And despite the fact that it had not been officially introduced as part of the show, whispers had spread that this circus had captured something very strange in Canada. A creature, a demon, a devil, a creature that was half human and half goat. It had been feared and respected in Canada by the local people for many years. And the second the circus had heard about it, they just had to have it. The Goatman would have people flocking from miles around to catch a glimpse of him. After months of hunting, the men had found the Goatman and managed to capture it and bundled it into a carriage and onto a train. It fought. It kicked and it made ungodly sounds. The train carriage would shake and rattle as it hurled itself against the four walls, fighting to escape. When it found that it could not force its way out of the carriage, something strange began to happen. Voices began to emanate from the carriage. Human voices. But at first the men said nothing. When the train would stop and they would walk the length of the carriages to ensure that there were no issues, they heard whispers from the carriage of the Goatman. Giggles and whispers. At first, they all thought they were imagining it, but no. The whispers and giggles would change and morph into the voices of their loved ones. The voices of wives and children were heard, encouraging them to open the carriage door. But that was impossible. Some men seemed to be almost hypnotized by the voices and would walk, zombie-like, to the carriage door with their arm outstretched, ready to open the door. But something innate would stop them at the last second, and they would pull their hand away, shake their heads and back away from the door. The Goatman would shriek and roar with an ungodly guttural sound. And the men wondered if it was a good idea to hunt and capture this beast in the first place. The storm rolled in over Pope Lick Creek as the train approached the bridge. There was a crackle of electricity in the air and a feeling of anticipation. Something was about to happen, but no one knew what. If they had known what was going to happen, there would have been no way to stop it. The trestle bridge over the creek was 100 feet high and nearly 800 feet long. The storm raged as the train approached the looming bridge. When the lightning struck the train, it was derailed immediately. There were no survivors. Well, no survivors except one. There are those that say that the Goatman had somehow invoked the lightning, that it had cursed the train and every one of its passengers who had taken it from its homeland and mistreated and abused it. Whether this is true or whether it was just a freak accident, the Goatman's carriage was empty. The door was unbolted, and there was no sign of a body. It had disappeared into the wilderness of Pope Lick Creek. In the years since, the Pope Lick monster has enacted its revenge on anyone who approached the trestle bridge. People will approach the bridge and hear the hypnotizing sound of the voices of their loved ones calling them up onto the bridge. They will follow the sound, and once they are on that bridge, there is no way of protecting yourself from oncoming trains. There are people who have allegedly witnessed the Goatman and managed to avoid going onto the bridge and certain death. They say that the Goatman has the body of a man, hair-covered goat legs, a snow-white face, wide-set eyes and a long nose. It has short and sharp horns on its forehead and long greasy hair that match the long hair on its legs. There are some who say that the Pope Lick monster carries a blood-stained axe and attacks its victims. And to be frank, there are even discrepancies in how the legend began. Some believe that the Pope Lick monster was actually once a real man, a goat farmer, who had resorted to making a deal with the devil in exchange for money and supernatural powers. Of course, deals with the devil are never straightforward, and he was transformed into a twisted hybrid Goatman, cursed to haunt the bridge for all eternity. It's important to note that numerous people really have lost their lives in search of the Pope Lick monster. The bridge is highly dangerous and should not be approached under any circumstances. Jefferstown Fire Chief Sean Dreisbach has said, "Stay off the tracks. These tracks are very dangerous. A train comes with little to no warning. You have nowhere to go once you are on that trestle other than to outrun the train. And when you see or hear that train, it's too late." So really, don't go looking for the Pope Lick monster. The Pope Lick monster is an urban legend, and a good one. But there have been people who have allegedly seen this elusive creature. In his book Goatman, Flesh or Folklore, J. Nathan Couch interviews people who believe that they saw something strange at Pope Lick Creek. A man named David Lewis reported that he would visit the bridge when he was in high school in search of the creature. It was around 1964, and David and his classmates witnessed something at the bridge. To the left of the bridge, I could see him down in a hollow, trying to hide behind a tree. He had white hair all over his body and red-looking eyes. It looked like a man. It never came towards us. Also, it did not have horns, as some would have people believe. It looked like a Bigfoot with white hair all over it. It was between 6 feet and 6 feet 5 inches tall. It stood like a man. According to the website NorthAmericanCryptids.com, allegedly in 1976, a group of teenagers claimed to have seen a hairy creature with horns running along the tracks near the bridge. In 1981, a couple claimed to have heard a strange noise coming from under the bridge while driving past it at night. And in 1994, a man claimed to have seen a large figure with glowing eyes standing on top of the bridge when he was fishing nearby. And stories of Goatmen exist all over the US. There are multiple versions of the Goatman legend in Texas. There is a story in LA, in Maryland, in North Carolina, in West Virginia, Wisconsin. The list seems endless. To give you another example, an article in atlasobscura.com explores another Goatman legend. Goatman's Bridge is the common nickname for what's formerly called Old Alton Bridge, an iron truss span that once connected Denton, Texas to Copper Canyon. Many who have crossed at night have claimed to have seen the demonic figure of a man with a goat's head waiting for them on the other side. The bridge got its nickname from a popular local ghost story. The legend concerns a successful African-American goat farmer who in 1938 is said to have been murdered on the bridge at the hands of local members of the Ku Klux Klan. It's said that the Klansmen lynched the goat farmer, hanging him with a noose over the side of the bridge. But when they went down below to confirm the goat farmer was dead, his body had disappeared. Alternate versions of the ghost story have also circulated, including one that suggests the bridge is actually haunted by the Goatman's wife. Another story blames the work of Satanists. Most versions of the tale tend to include a warning that knocking 3 times on the trusses of the bridge runs the risk of bringing out the Goatman. Over the decades, there have been numerous alleged sightings of a ghost-like apparition with a goat head haunting the area. Some locals have claimed to see glowing eyes staring at them on the bridge, while others have claimed to hear splashing in the creek directly below, followed by unsettling laughter. In 2017, BuzzFeed Unsolved, Supernatural, investigated some of these claims. Naturally, none of the ghost stories surrounding the bridge are based on any specific historical facts. Today, the bridge is only used for foot traffic, since a replacement bridge was constructed nearby. Of course, if there are so many Goatman legends all over the US and indeed all over the world, then surely there are eyewitness testimonies, and the answer is yes, there are. It is difficult to wheedle them out among friend of a friend stories, but they do exist. A poster on Paranormal Studies and Inquiry Canada wrote, "I was in my early teens in the mid-1980s. I experienced the same being twice in 2 separate locations and times. The first time was in the woods near Uxbridge, camping with scouts. I and another kid heard a strange deep breathing like a bull outside the tent. The being became agitated and circled the tent, banging on the side of it. The being sounded as though it was very tall and walked on 2 hooves. The second experience was the same deep breathing sound at my aunt's house. I first thought my uncle was playing a joke on me. I soon realised the lung capacity of this breathing far exceeded that of a man. The sound was in another room at first. Next, I heard what sounded like hooves on the old wooden floor moving towards me. The noisy steps stopped in the doorway to the room that I was in. The deep breathing continued and my heart was now racing. I thought that would be the end of it. But then the steps continued rapidly to where I was lying on the floor. The two massive hooves came to rest, straddling me in my sleeping bag. The being was pulling at my sleeping bag, trying to uncover my face. I felt as though I was being partially lifted from the floor from the force. I was terrified and fought with everything I had to avoid seeing the face of the intruder. I screamed with everything I had, and after a few seconds the being retreated. I heard 3 rapid steps as it departed beyond my head, and then it vanished. Another user on Native Ghost Stories and Other Paranormal Entities wrote, "This is a story my mom and the rest of my family have told me. They said that my aunt was in the bathroom one morning at around 5 o'clock. It was still dark out and she was getting ready for work. While she was in there doing her business, a hand started coming in from the window. She started screaming so loud that she woke up everybody in the house. What's even stranger is that when they went to look outside, they saw hoof prints, like a goat would leave, on the porch. It, or whoever it was, came down the driveway onto the porch to the door and turned to go around the house. They never knew what it was." And in an article for Mysterious Universe, Brent Swanser recalled 2 Goatman experiences that he had come across. The witness says that he had been driving along a rural road in the state of Colorado when he noticed someone on the side of the road ahead. At the time, it had been rather foul weather and a mixture of rain and snow had been raining down upon them. The witness pulled up beside what he at first thought was a man, perhaps in trouble, but it turned out to be anything but. He explained to me, "I noticed that his body proportions were all wrong and that his legs were long and thin. I realised something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was yet. I still thought there might have been an accident or something. So I pulled up next to this strange man, and that was when I noticed that he had skinny goat-like legs ending in hooves, and he looked up at me with a muzzled face I will never forget. Those eyes were like embers, and I got the distinct sense that it did not want to be bothered. I pressed the accelerator and I was out of there." In another account, the witness says she was at her grandparents' rural farm in Texas and that she had the habit of sitting out on the porch at dusk to watch the changing colours of the sky. One evening, she was sitting out there as usual when she saw a very strange sight indeed. Something came wandering out into view that seemed to be neither human nor animal, and it began to meander across the landscape towards her. The figure looked hunched over at first, but as it approached, it suddenly stood up on 2 legs, and she could see that it was far stranger than she could have imagined. She said it looked like some kind of demon, standing upon goat-like legs ending in hooves, and it made a snorting sound the likes of which I have never heard. It took a few steps towards me, its hooves clapping heavily upon the hard-packed earth, and it just sort of stared at me. Its face was somewhat human, but contorted and with dimensions that were sort of off, and it had 2 horns perched upon its head. The thing, whatever it was, examined me, cocked its head as if in curiosity, and then bolted away. And I mean bolted. It was so fast. Before I knew it, it was gone. And for the last of our eyewitness accounts today, we are ending in England, where the news site Northants Live reported on a Goatman sighting in 2022. A late-night sighting of an unexplained 6-foot man-goat in Northamptonshire has got local residents spooked. The incident happened on the A425 near the village of Staverton at around 2 a.m. in the early hours of Sunday, February the 20th. It was discussed on the online forum Mumsnet, posted by the user Galloping High Road. The initial message read, "We'd been away for a few nights and travelled back quite late. Towards the end of our journey, this was at around 2 a.m, we were driving along an A road in a rural area when something crossed the road in front of us in full headlights for about 3 seconds. It was about the height of a person, maybe 6 feet or over. but had short, powerful legs and hips which seemed to move in a circular, fluid fashion. It was not a deer because it stood on 2 legs. This was in the Midlands, and the area is traditional rolling fields and woodland. In this particular spot, there are no houses or buildings. The nearest is over a mile away. We drove back today, as it's only 7 miles from home, to look at the road layout, and whatever it was moved into a wide, bowl-shaped field dropping down to a stream. Any ideas? The location was confirmed on Google Earth as a lay-by next to fields on the A425 just outside Staverton. Many theories have been put forward, such as a wild wallaby or a roaming bear, with a deer ruled out by the original poster. Other more fanciful ideas are the mythical creature of Slenderman or a Sasquatch. In response, Galloping High Road replied, "Not a Goatman, Slenderman, Sasquatch. These things don't exist. The colour was dark brown, but it's always hard to tell in full beam. The thin bear is the best way to describe it. Droopy shoulders, but wide hips at the base. But obviously not a bear in the UK. They were adamant it was definitely not human, and more of a mix of goat and deer." I think we can all agree that the stories of axe-wielding goatmen with psychic powers luring people to their death or simply hacking them to pieces with an axe are simply urban legends, like the Hookman. But people seem to be seeing something that resembles this Goatman of legend. So is this really an entity to be dismissed? Or is this a case of mistaken identity, where people are seeing something, and Goatman just seems like the best fit? I hadn't really expected to go down a Goatman rabbit hole when I was researching for this story, but look, here we are. This is where we ended up. And I want to reiterate this again for the last time on this episode. Do not go to that bridge looking for Goatman, the public monster. That bridge is so dangerous. It is so dangerous. Okay, just appreciate the urban legend for what it is as a good story, and know that if you go fanning around on that bridge and a train comes, you are not getting off that bridge. So that's that out of the way. I sort of thought that Goatman would just be, public monster would be a good urban legend story, and that would be it. But then the more I dug into it, the more I was like, people are seeing these weird goatmen creatures everywhere. That sounds like I'm saying like the world is inundated with goatmen, and I don't think that's the case. But I do think people are seeing something. I'm just not entirely sure what that something is. And just before we go any further as well, as always, all the sources for where I got all the information for this episode are going to be in the description of this episode, so you can have a deep dive into them yourself if you feel inclined to do so. To go back to the very beginning when I was talking about the satyr, I didn't expect to be talking about permanent exaggerated erections and depictions of a goatman masturbating in this episode, but there we are. I am curious about why it is goats specifically that are so popular within this legend. I mean, they are strange creatures, goats in general. Like, if you look at them, they've got square pupils and all. They're very bizarre. They're just strange creatures. And it's interesting that this ancient lore of like the satyr, of Pan, of like Leshy from Slavic lore, they seem to have somehow crossed over into modern urban legends, but in a more horror-filled way. In a modern context, we're still talking about goatmen, but we're talking about them as, a creature that can bludgeon you to death or can hack you to pieces with an axe, whereas in ancient times, they were seen as gods of the forest. And I wonder if, in some cases, those circus sideshows really did contribute to that. Like, I obviously don't agree with calling people who were in circus sideshows circus freaks, but that was what they were known as at the time. And they were, fucking hell, they were a lucrative business. I mean, it's horrendous. Please don't get me wrong. The way that these people were treated it was essentially slavery. And it does frustrate me that P.T. Barnum has been sort of let off the hook for his terrible behaviour because Hugh Jackman sings a few nice songs. Greatest Showman is a great film. There's no doubt about that. But P.T. Barnum was not a nice man, and he did go looking for people who he could add to his sideshow and didn't treat them well at all. And as an aside, the story of Grady Stiles, who was the lobster boy, his story is a really fascinating story. It's not pleasant, so I would, trigger warning if you're going to read it. He was a horrible man and really abusive. And I think apparently his wife ended up hiring hitmen to kill him. And when she was arrested and brought to prison, they realised that Grady Stiles had branded her, that his name, like Grady Stiles III, was tattooed on her arse. Like, wild. The story was crazy. So it is an interesting story to read about. And aside from the very human beings who were in these sideshows, there were often times where they had like mermaids, where they would make mermaids and various other creatures. And I wonder if there were goatmen, creatures that were presented in these sideshows as having been real entities or real human goat hybrids, when we know they were sometimes very good fakes. Also, interestingly, in the book Goatmen, Flesh or Folklore, Nathan Couch talks about a man who used to travel around the USA, and he was a preacher and was a really eccentric character. So he travelled around on this little carriage that was pulled by goats, and he had like a pointy beard, and he seems to have visited all of the places where, Goatmen legends sprung up years later. So, it might be possible that there is some conflation of his story there too. But whatever the loose basis for these urban legends is, I do love the dramatics that goes into these urban legends. And, some of them are similar across the country, but then other times they're completely different but have the same outcome, as in you end up with a goat man who is haunting this bridge or this woods, and he can lure you to your death or simply attack you and absolutely batter you with an axe. And it's interesting that these stories often have, physiological differences that are quite significant. So the goat man at Pope Lick Creek often is said to have quite human-like features with horns and a deformed body and then goat legs. But then there's other people that are like, it's not a goat man, it's a sheep man, get it right. And then there's other stories where it's the body of a man and the head of a goat. And then other stories where it's essentially like a giant bipedal goat, which I would argue is maybe more terrifying. But all that aside, there is probably an element of keeping children safe in these stories. Like for the Pope Lick Bridge, it's probably like you can't go onto the bridge because Goatman will kill you, because teenagers are famously hardwired to take certain risks, right? And probably there was a lot of ignoring of the warnings of, if you go on this bridge, the train will come and you won't be able to protect yourself. You won't be able to get to a safe space. There is no safe space on this track, right? If that's not working, maybe at some point they were like, well, the legend of the goat man, if you go onto that bridge, the goat man will get you. Maybe there's an element of that in a kind of hope to keep children safe. Unfortunately, people have continued to die on that bridge up until very recent years. But whatever the case may be, right? People are seeing something. So you've got David Lewis's story where he talked about seeing a creature kind of hiding behind a tree, and it was man-sized and had white hair all over it. Also, he says it was between 6 foot and 6'5" tall. Very specific heights there. I mean, maybe they went down and kind of did references with the tree afterwards, whatever. But I understand why he then said, because he's one of the people that was like, it's not a goat man, it's a sheep man, because it's covered in this white hair all over its body. To me, that doesn't sound like anything goat man related. That sounds like some sort of Bigfoot type creature. A bipedal ape man that is covered in hair. And then because of the location, these are teenagers that are at Pope Lick Creek trying to see the Pope Lick monster. Because of the location, the stories get conflated. He refers to it as a goat man, and he says, I saw goat man / sheep man at the Pope Lick Creek. And actually, maybe it's something else entirely. maybe people are seeing something in this area and obviously the story existed already. So pretty much all sightings and experiences become attributed to this particular story. And then you have the kind of different eyewitness accounts from various people from across the annals of the internet. And the first one was about the boy who was, with the Boy Scouts and experienced the heavy breathing and this feeling of this thing being very tall and walking on two hooves. And I have to say, without being dismissive of someone's experience, those two experiences to me sound like they might have been sleep paralysis. And if it's not sleep paralysis, the kind of suggestion is that he is being haunted by some sort of entity that has hooves that is clip-clopping across the wooden floor and trying to pull a sleeping bag off him. I think it's very interesting that in both circumstances, he was in a sleeping bag. So the first one in a tent in the middle of the night on a camping Boy Scout trip, and the second one in a sleeping bag on the floor. So probably was having a very uncomfortable sleep. So potentially 2 sleep paralysis experiences. I think it's also important to reference the fact that the devil is often portrayed as having hooves. So when you think about all the stories we have done over the years about a mysterious stranger who shows up to a card game, who is a very charming man and wins money at this card game, and then somebody drops a card and they look down and realise that this handsome stranger has hooves like a goat and he blasts off through the ceiling or whatever it is. So maybe for some people, depending on what your religious belief is or what stories you were told about the devil, that the most terrifying thing that could appear to you in sleep paralysis or in general would be this hooved entity that is so grotesque and terrifying to lay your eyes on. There's a certain element of it feeling, I guess, demonic, if you wanted to use that word. And I'm going to skip forward to the Mumsnet story that I ended with. I will come back to the other ones in a second. But, correct me if I'm wrong, right? But I am pretty sure that deer and goats do walk on their hind legs on occasion. I've just come away and done a quick Google, and, some woodsy folk, people who live near and around forests and woodland, are saying that during mating season in particular, deer will rear up on their hind legs and attack other deer like that, so they can use their front hooves as weapons. Or if they're trying to get food, they can stand up on their hind legs and move around. So I'm sort of thinking maybe that's one of those situations. And I think that animals like deer and goats, when you see them on their hind legs bopping around, it is so beyond comprehension, because we don't expect that deer and goats are going to be moving around like that, that we think, well, surely it can't have been. It must have been something else. But the stories that were in between really did give me the heebie-jeebies. So the first one was the aunt in the bathroom at, 5 o'clock in the morning, and a hand comes in the window. And then, obviously she screams and panics, and they realise there's hoof prints, like goat prints on the porch, that or whatever it was came down the driveway. Whatever that was, the thought of a hand coming through the window makes me want to curl up into a ball, because that feels like one of those situations where it's like, which is worse? If it's something paranormal, if it's a cryptid or whatever, it's terrifying. If it's human, it's terrifying. And similarly, the guy being out in the car and driving home and seeing a man, on the side of the road and thinking, oh, this man must be in trouble, and then realising he's got like skinny goat legs and glowing red eyes. Like, that seems like a whole other kettle of fish, to be honest. And what I was kind of left with, which was referenced kind of numerous times in the various articles that I read for this episode, was this idea that if there are multiple different universes and, time slips happen and glitches in the matrix and all that kind of stuff, who's to say what exists in other universes? Who's to say there isn't a whole universe of goat people knocking around, and every so often they happen to slip into our dimension. I did say recently that time slip, glitch in the matrix, other universes was my new thing, and it is going to be my understanding of everything from now on, and I am sticking to it. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and thank you for your patience while I took a break. If you would like to send in your story, Goatman related or otherwise, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you can access heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
The new Boost Mobile network is offering unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month for life.
That sounds like a threat.
Then how do you think we should say it?
Unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month for the rest of your life?
I don't know.
Until your ultimate demise.
What if we just say forever?
Okay.
$25 a month, forever.
Get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile forever.
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.